I'll be talking about one of the men who wore one of the heaviest crowns in history, also known as King George III. The monarch who ruled Britain during, I'd say, one of the most dramatic times the world has truly ever seen. He is often remembered by Americans as the Mad Tyrant or the Mad King who lost the American colonies. But I could truly say there's a lot more to him than that. He was a king of science, king of family, faith, perseverance, a man who ruled for about 60 years through wars, revolutions, and a time of massive changes. By the end of this presentation, I hope that you guys will see that King George isn't just a villain in American history, and he's more as a human just trying to hold together a big empire during a vast transition in history. George William Frederick, later known as King George III, he was born on June 4th of 1738 in London, England. He became king at just 22 years old in 1760, following the death of his grandfather, George II. His reign would last him roughly around 6 decades, which made him one of the most longest reigns of monarchs, second to Queen Victoria and to Queen Elizabeth II as well. George came from the House of Hanover, a royal family that originally ruled parts of Germany. His great-grandfather, George I, and his grandfather, George II, were more from Germany. Born and raised, mostly spoke German. They honestly were really never able to be adjusted to the British culture, as they were born, raised, everything German about them. As they spoke German, they had German advisors for them, and were often viewed by other people, by like British people, as foreign rulers, since they weren't from where they originated. George III, though, was the first to change that, as he was raised in England, spoke perfect English, which helped him be liked by a lot, and considered himself 100% British. By this, many of the British people loved him, thought that he was the one. He even declared proudly, "Born and educated in this country, I glory in the name of Britain." And by that one line, that meant everything to the British people. It made them feel like he was truly their king and he was meant to be there. As a young prince, George was shy, but he was intelligent. He had a tutor growing up, a mentor, Lord Bute, and his mother, Princess Augusta, would always help him, raise him to be a disciplined, hardworking, morality of the ruler, and that power and luxury is not his main thing, not his prime deal. But we will see his own downfall. The third was known for his hard work, morality, and strong family values. He married Queen Charlotte in 1761, and like many other kings before him, he was faithful to her. Their marriage lasted around 57 years, and together they had 15 children, 9 sons, and 6 daughters. He was known to play music with his children, read them stories, and join them in for evening prayers. His home life was warm and genuine, something rare among European monarchs at that time. He was also known as Farmer George, a nickname the people gave him not as an insult, but truly as a compliment. He loved agriculture and science, as he studied crop rotation, soil improvement, and even owned a working model farm at the Windsor where he tested new farming techniques. He believed that a strong nation started with healthy, productive people, not just with wealth or armies. That connection to ordinary life made him surprisingly popular with common citizens. But George also made a stubborn streak. He could be very inflexible, proud, and determined to have his way. Once he made up his mind, it was truly nearly impossible to change it, even when any type of compromise might have helped. That personality trait, his sense of moral rightness, would later play a huge role in the American Revolution. One thing that was truly often overlooked is that George III was highly intelligent and curious. He loved astronomy, physics, chemistry, architecture, and music. He supported scientists, artists, inventors, including William Herschel, the man who discovered the planet Uranus in 1781, using a telescope that George himself helped fund. He also developed Kew Gardens, which became one of the most famous farming centers in the world. He even kept one of Europe's largest libraries, over 65,000 books filled with works on science, history, and philosophy. He also read a lot of those. George genuinely believed that a good ruler should lead by example, promoting morality, education, and progress. He was also a human being struggling with something few understood at the time, which was his mental illness. Later in life, George began to suffer from episodes of confusion, mania, insomnia. Today, doctors believe he had porphyria, a genetic blood disorder that can affect the brain and the nervous system. During his worst episodes, he would usually rapidly speak for hours, repeat phrases, and seem unaware of his surroundings. These moments led to the public calling him the Mad King, which is heartbreaking because despite his brilliance, those health issues overshadowed his later years, and by 1811 he was unfit to rule, and his son, the future George IV, ruled as Prince Regent until his father's death in 1820. Let's dive in about the major events that shaped his reign and changed the world. When George became king at just 22, Britain was already globally powerful, and as he joined midst of the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 1763 against France. When the war ended, Britain had gained massive new territories, including Canada, India, and parts of the Caribbean. It was a victory that expanded the empire, but also left Britain deeply in debt. To recover money, the Parliament decided to tax the American colonies. Acts like the Stamp Act in 1765, Townshend Act 1767, and the Tea Act in 1773 angered the colonists who had no representatives in the Parliament, but the response was no taxation without representation. George saw these protests not just as a political issue, but as a challenge to royal authority. He believed that if Britain gave in, and the entire empire could collapse. So he stood firm, convinced that he was defending law and order, but things spiraled. Even the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, and the Intolerable Acts pushed both sides through the war during the American Revolution from 1775 to 1783. George III was determined not to lose. He refused to peace offers early on and urged Parliament to send troops. The colonists, meanwhile, declared independence in 1776 and even called him a tyrant in the Declaration of Independence. By 1783, Britain had lost the war and America had become independent for George. It was a humiliating defeat, and for months he withdrew from public life. But what is interesting is that rather than seeking revenge, he just accepted his defeat. Humility helped him slowly regain the respect of his people, pretty much showing that he was glad that he lost and that he needed to humble himself. Now let's get into his later accomplishments. After losing the American colonies, he focused more on rebuilding Britain's stability and guiding it into a new era. He formed a strong partnership with William Pitt the Younger, which was Britain's youngest ever prime minister. Together, they have restored the economy, reformed the government, and have strengthened the navy. This set the stage for Britain's rise as the world's industrial leader. The Industrial Revolution began during George's reign with inventions like spinning jenny, the steam engine, and mechanized factories, transforming the nation. Trade expanded, cities grew, Britain became the workshop of the world. At the same time, Europe was still being shaken up by the French Revolution, 1789, and later rise of the Napoleon Bonaparte. Britain fought a long series of wars against France, known as the Napoleonic Wars of 1803 to 1815. Even though George's illness kept him from leading directly, his determination and patriotism helped shape the country. George III's legacy was full of both light and shadow, of great accomplishments and very painful mistakes. Starting with the positive side, he was a king of integrity, morality, who cared deeply about the right thing. He promoted science, education, and agriculture. He helped shape the culture identity of modern Britain. He was also one of the most personally loyal and decent monarchs Britain ever had. He never had a mistress, scandals, or he didn't ever abuse his power. He reigned during the beginnings of Britain's Industrial Revolution, a period that transformed society forever. Now let's move on to his negative side. His stubbornness and refusal to compromise led directly to the loss of American colonies. His illness caused instability and confusion in his final years. And for generations, he was remembered, especially in America, as a tyrant, largely due to the revolutionary propaganda and the stories that exaggerated his faults. It wasn't until centuries later that historians truly began to see him as a human who was tragically misunderstood, not just as a villain, but as a monarch trying to do his best in truly, I'd say, impossible circumstances that were hard. Now let's dive into George's short-term and his long-term impact. Starting with the short term, George's reign was marked by conflict and challenge, including the loss of America, political disputes at home, and his own declining health. But in the long term, his reign laid the groundwork for the Britain we recognize today. Under his leadership, Britain became a constitutional monarchy where Parliament gained more power and the king's role became more symbolic, shaping how the government still works today. He also oversaw the foundation of Britain's industrial and scientific leadership, which carried into the 19th century. And though the United States broke away, the relationship between the two nations eventually became one mutual respect and shared history. George III's era kind of symbolized the turning point between old monarchy and modern democracy, between an age of kings and an age of citizens. Conclusion: King George III was definitely more than just the king who lost America. He was a loyal husband, a curious thinker, and a ruler who really tried to lead by example and to make what's best for his people. Sure, he made big mistakes, really big ones, but he also cared deeply about his country and what he wanted to do right and what he thought was right. Even with all the challenges he faced, with the wars, family issues, and his own mental struggles, he truly helped shape Britain into a stronger, more modern nation. He supported science, education, and exploration, and a lot of what he started still influence Britain today. People called him mad, but maybe that was really what made him stand out. Wasn't just the madness, it was how much he cared, even when everything around him was just falling apart. In the end, his story reminds us that leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about staying strong, learning from mistakes, and caring enough to keep going.